Hollywood was making Star Wars, while in top-secret Soviet workshops, a weapon was being born that gave even its own creators goosebumps. Not toy blasters, but real laser tanks on Caterpillar tracks. But what began as a triumph of Soviet genius turned into a series of shocking failures that cost the country a fortune. You will learn about a tank that guzzled fuel like 10 trucks but couldn't fire more than once every 15 seconds. About vehicles accepted into service, yet so useless their crews didn't even know how to fight with them. We will reveal the shameful secret of the son of the Minister of Defense who headed this ambitious project, and how under his leadership billions of rubles turned into scrap metal. You will see how the only surviving laser monster, compression, became a museum exhibit, a silent reproach to a bygone era, and why American generals, upon receiving intelligence on these machines, felt not horror, but relief. This is the story of how the Soviet Union lost its own Star Wars on Earth, how blind faith in technology led to the creation of the most expensive and most useless weapons in history. All the details, from secret tests to where the unique prototypes vanished without a trace, are in this episode. In 1977, the whole world was going crazy over Star Wars. Laser swords and blasters were exciting sci-fi. But on the other side of the Iron Curtain, in absolute secrecy, that same sci-fi was about to become harsh military reality. While Hollywood was entertaining audiences, the USSR was already nurturing the idea of creating the unthinkable, a real laser tank. And the driving force wasn't dreams of the future, but a very specific and serious threat of the present. The late 1970s were a turning point in the Cold War. The advantage in armor and gun caliber began to pale before a new challenge, the enemy's electronic eyes. American tanks, attack helicopters, and reconnaissance aircraft were equipped with next-generation optoelectronic systems. They could see in the dark, through smoke, at enormous distances, hitting targets before Soviet hardware could get close. Traditional methods, smoke screens or electronic warfare, were useless against these optics. A deadlock emerged. How do you fight an opponent who strikes first because they see farther and clearer? The answer came from what seemed like pure science. Lasers, optical quantum generators, were by then no longer just lab curiosities. Their thin, incredibly powerful beam could burn through metal at a distance. Someone in the Soviet military or scientific circles posed a paradoxical question. What if instead of trying to pierce enemy armor, you simply rob the enemy of the most valuable thing on the battlefield, its sight? If you could burn out the fragile lens of a sight, the sensitive matrix of a camera, or the retina of a gunner's eye with a powerful pulse, even the most perfect tank or helicopter would turn into a helpless, blind target. Thus, from cold calculation, a futuristic idea was born, a tank blinder, a machine that leaves behind no explosions or fires, but sows chaos and helplessness in enemy ranks long before the main battle. This idea was so daring and promising that it was immediately embraced at the highest level. It was given the highest priority, and colossal resources were allotted for its realization. But to bring such an ambitious, almost fantastical concept to life, they needed not just a talented designer, but a person endowed with exceptional power, connections, and political will. The choice fell on a candidate who himself became a sensational statement and a message to the entire military-industrial complex, the son of one of the most influential men in the state. The idea materialized in 1978 with the creation of the Astrophysics Research and Production Association. This wasn't just another design bureau, it was the headquarters of a laser revolution, granted carte blanche to develop beam weapons for all branches of the military. Igor Petishin became the general director, and the post of chief designer, a deafening signal to all, was taken by Nikolai Dmitrovich Ustinov. His surname needed no introduction. He was the son of Dmitry Ustinov, a member of the Politburo and Minister of Defense of the USSR. This appointment guaranteed the project unprecedented funding, access to any resources, and the highest level of secrecy. Work began under the personal patronage of one of the most powerful men in the country. The principle to be embodied in metal was elegant. The complex was to use a low-powered probing laser to scan the battlefield for the characteristic glint of enemy lenses. Upon detecting a reflection, the automatic system would lock the coordinates. Then the main caliber would engage, a powerful combat laser whose focused pulse would burn through the enemy's optics in a fraction of a second. This first embodiment of the concept was given a telling name: stiletto. They used the proven chassis of the Su-100P self-propelled gun as a base. Engineers faced the first fundamental problem. The laser was a monstrously energy-hungry beast. The solution was radical. They crammed a second 400-horsepower engine into the hull, working exclusively as a generator to power the laser system. The turret housed the system itself with large mirrors meant to redirect the beam. It was with this optics that the main headaches began. Creating a mirror that could withstand the power to melt steel and still aim accurately at a target turned out to be a colossal engineering challenge. By the early 1980s, 2 prototypes were assembled. Tests revealed harsh realities. The effective range for damaging optics was about 3 kilometers. The rate of fire was catastrophically low. 1 shot every 15 seconds, and after a series of 20 pulses, the system required 15 minutes to cool down. And yet, despite the obvious limitations, in 1982, the 1K11 Stilet complex was officially accepted into service. The developers received state prizes, and Nikolai Ustinov got the title of Hero of Socialist Labor. Formally, the Army received a weapon of the future, but those who created it already understood. Stilet was just the first clumsy step. Its drawbacks, a bulky mirror system, inability to work against moving targets, and cyclical operation, were too serious. While the first prototypes underwent field trials, in the top-secret workshops of astrophysics, work was in full swing on a fundamentally new machine, meant not to fix, but to completely rewrite the concept of a laser tank. The experience gained from creating the Stilet was priceless. It clearly showed the dead end of the path with bulky mirror systems, which reduced beam power and were extremely unreliable. Moreover, the Stilet could effectively fight only relatively static ground targets. The new challenge became attack helicopters, swift, maneuverable, and equipped with the same perfect optics. They had to be stopped before they could even see and hit Soviet tanks. The answer was the Sanguine complex, representing not just an upgrade, but a qualitative technological leap. Astrophysics engineers made a revolution by abandoning intermediate mirrors. In the Sanguine, the battle laser aimed at the target directly, drastically increasing the beam's power and accuracy. But the main know-how was the so-called shot resolution system, extremely complex automation that could track a moving target, calculate lead, and hit it. Now, a helicopter flying at speed could be blinded. As a base, they chose not a tank chassis, but the ZSU-23-4 Shilpa anti-aircraft self-propelled gun, originally designed to fight aerial targets. Tests that began in 1983 yielded staggering, almost unbelievable results. The declared range for damaging helicopter optics exceeded 10 kilometers. This meant the Sanguine could disable an enemy machine before it even saw Soviet positions. It seemed like a triumph. However, upon closer inspection, the story of Sanguine became a mirror image of the Stilet's fate, only on a larger scale. The complex again turned out to be incredibly expensive, complex to maintain, and extremely finicky about weather conditions. Fog, rain, or dust reduced its phenomenal range to a minimum. But the main fatal paradox for the entire concept manifested here in full. The laser tank blinded but did not destroy. A helicopter with burned-out optics could turn around and leave, only to return after repair. The military needed a weapon that guaranteed a kill, not one that temporarily disabled it. On the backdrop of relatively cheap and reliable anti-aircraft missiles and guns, the Sanguine, despite its futuristic characteristics, looked like an unaffordable luxury. And again, mass production was never launched. But as if not noticing the dead end, Ustinov's design bureau, intoxicated by the very process of overcoming the impossible, was already plunging into an even greater technological gamble. They conceived a machine meant to eclipse all previous failures at once, a multi-channel laser monster with the codename Compression. The late 1980s were for the Soviet Union a time of anxious foreboding. The economy was crumbling, war raged in Afghanistan, and perestroika was eating away from within. But in this vacuum of impending collapse, the astrophysics NPO, seemingly detached from reality, was working on its most ambitious creation. The absurdity of the situation was striking. While store shelves emptied, a laser complex costing as much as an entire aircraft plant was being born at secret proving grounds. This project, codenamed Compression, was meant to be the crown of the Soviet laser program, the definitive answer to all the challenges and shortcomings of its predecessors. If Stilet and Sanguine were experimental pistols, Compression was conceived as a multi-barreled laser battery. It was based on the then newest 2S-19 Msta-S self-propelled howitzer. The turret was significantly enlarged to house an incredible optical system. Not one or two channels, but a whole 15 lenses in 3 rows. 12 of these were combat emitters, working on different frequencies. This was the genius idea. An enemy could protect against a laser of one specific spectrum with a special filter, but against a simultaneous salvo of 12 beams of different wavelengths, they were powerless. An autonomous power unit was installed in the rear of the turret to feed this ravenous monster. The guidance system received elements we would now call the beginnings of artificial intelligence. It could independently search for glinting targets, determine the type of optics, and choose an attack program. Legends swirled around the machine, claiming its heart was a giant 30-kilogram synthetic ruby crystal, a unique technology, the details of which remain classified to this day. In December 1990, Ural Transmash assembled a prototype of this futuristic Leviathan. Testing continued against the backdrop of the state's agony, the coup, the collapse of the USSR, economic collapse. And against this backdrop, in 1992, the compression complex was officially recommended for adoption into service. Formally, this happened already in Russia. The developers again received state prizes, and Nikolai Ustinov could consider his mission accomplished.
He had created the most perfect laser combat vehicle in the world, a multi-channel complex superior to everything before it. But this victory was utterly virtual. The new Russian authorities, whose army wasn't receiving pay and whose factories were shutting down, faced a simple and cruel question: what to do with this technological wonder, worth billions and fiendishly complex to maintain, born of a dying empire for a war of the future that never came. Paradoxically, the formal culmination of all the titanic work on Soviet laser tanks was their official adoption into service. Each of the three complexes, Stellet, Sanguine, and Compression, underwent this bureaucratic ritual. The developers received Lenin and state prizes. Nikolai Ustinov was awarded the Star of Hero of Socialist Labor, and reports featured enthusiastic phrases about breakthrough superiority over a likely adversary. On paper, it all looked like a triumphant march of advanced technology, while in the secret safes of the Ministry of Defense lay documents stating that the Soviet and then Russian army possessed a unique, unparalleled fleet of combat laser systems. However, behind this facade of official success hid a much more complex and disappointing reality. None of these futuristic projects ever crossed the threshold of experimental or limited series production. Factory floors didn't hum with the assembly of mass-produced sanguines, and the Army didn't form separate laser tank divisions. The reasons for this oblivion in life were fundamental and insurmountable. The first and most obvious was the astronomical, almost absurd cost of each complex. These machines weren't just tanks with a new gun, they were mobile research institutes on tracks. Giant crystal generators, unique optics requiring jeweler-like calibration, super-sensitive detection and automatic target tracking systems, powerful autonomous generators. All this made the price of a single unit comparable to that of a small factory or an entire squadron of conventional aircraft. The economy of the late USSR and then crisis-ridden Russia of the 90s simply couldn't afford such a luxury. The second stumbling block was the monstrous complexity of operation and maintenance. The laser tank was as finicky as a Formula One racing car. It required special storage conditions, specially trained crews of engineer physicists, and extremely complex and expensive repairs. In the conditions of field exercises with their dust, dirt, shaking, and minimal technical support, this fragile high-tech system was doomed to constant breakdowns. The Army needed a reliable and easy-to-use workhorse, not a museum piece requiring greenhouse conditions. But the most important tactical reason for the failure was a fundamental flaw in the very concept. A laser tank was, by its nature, a passive defensive weapon, not a strike one. It couldn't destroy an enemy tank, shoot down a plane, or suppress a firing point. Its function was limited to blinding, enabling optical systems. In a hypothetical large-scale conflict, this could undoubtedly provide a serious tactical advantage for a few minutes or hours. However, for generals thinking in categories of total defeat and physical destruction of enemy manpower and equipment, such a function seemed secondary, auxiliary. Why build a super expensive and complex blinder if the same task could be solved with a cheap smokescreen? And for guaranteed destruction, there were reliable missiles, artillery, and aviation. The laser tank turned out to be a solution in search of a problem, a weapon without a clear niche in real combat doctrine. So their fate was sealed. These children of giant ambitions and scientific genius remained phantoms, officially existing but never entering real combat. Their careers ended almost before they began, in the silence of archives and on the pages of reports. But if their service path is a virtual story, the physical fate of the iron embodiments of this dream unfolded quite tangibly and eloquently. So where did these unique machines, these Star Wars in metal, on which a fantastic sum of public money was spent, end up? Their further fate became a silent but crystal-clear epilogue to this entire, grandiose, ambitious, and ultimately sad epic.
After years of oblivion, armored vehicle enthusiasts and historians pieced together the fate of these steel ghosts. Their post-war biography became an eloquent final chord to the whole story. The stylet prototypes, the program's firstborns, were found in pitiful condition. One specimen was discovered in the late 1990s on the territory of the 61st Armored Repair Plant near St. Petersburg. The second in 2010 at the Kharkiv Tank Repair Plant. Both were a sorry sight, stripped, mutilated Su-100P chassis. All the laser guts, unique mirrors, generators, and control systems, everything had been removed and vanished without a trace. To where remains a mystery. Perhaps the equipment was scrapped, or perhaps carefully disassembled and preserved in some secret storage. But for the world, only rusty carcasses remained of the stylet prototypes. The story with the sanguine prototypes is even more mysterious. There isn't a single reliable photograph of a surviving complex in the public domain. It's unknown how many prototypes were assembled or where they are now. They literally dissolved into the bowels of the defense system. Perhaps they were dismantled for technology study. Perhaps they still gather dust in some abandoned hangars under the strictest secrecy. Sanguine remained the most ghostly and intangible of the entire trio. Only compression, the most complex and perfect monster, met a different fate. The single-built prototype was not scrapped. In the 2010s, it was restored and placed in the Military Technical Museum in the village of Ivanovskoye near Moscow. Today, anyone can see this 41-ton behemoth with its 15 mysterious lenses. It stands as a vivid, almost surreal monument to a bygone era, an era of giant ambitions, unlimited resources, and a belief that technology could turn any sci-fi scenario into metal. The museum exhibit, Compression, is both a trophy and a tombstone. Thus, the physical legacy of the Soviet laser program boiled down to a couple of rusty chassis, a vague legend, and one museum exhibit. Looking at this outcome, a bitter question begs to be asked. Was all this titanic labor, these billions of rubles and years of work by the country's best minds, a waste? Was this a grandiose failure? To answer, we must step away from simple arithmetic and look at the project from a different angle. Assessing the Soviet laser tank program from a standpoint of cold reason, the conclusion seems unequivocal. It was a failure. Colossal financial and intellectual resources were spent on creating a weapon with a narrow and debatable tactical niche. The machines proved too expensive for mass production, too complex for army operation, and too dependent on ideal conditions. Their fundamental principle, blinding instead of destroying, was never accepted by military doctrine as a priority. In competition with classic weapons, they lost on all counts: cost, reliability, and ultimate effectiveness. However, if you look more broadly, the picture becomes less clear-cut. From a purely engineering standpoint, it was an unprecedented technological triumph. Soviet scientists and designers didn't just dream, they created real, working, highly complex combat systems decades ahead of their time. They solved tasks that seemed like science fiction.
direct laser beam guidance, automatic tracking of moving targets, creation of multi-channel emitters. Moreover, this project achieved one of the key goals of the Cold War: psychological impact. When intelligence on Stilet reached the US, it caused a real shock in the Pentagon and in Congress. The fact of the Soviet laser tank's existence was used as an argument to secure funding for their own programs and created a sense of technological lag. The USSR clearly demonstrated it could turn Hollywood fantasy into harsh steel, forcing the adversary to seriously consider a potential that was never fully realized. Thus, these tanks lost the battle in the workshops and on the proving grounds, but won a battle in mines and on drawing boards. They became a vivid symbol of an era when ambition drove the assault on seemingly inaccessible technological peaks. Their main legacy is not the hulls gathering dust in museums or scrapyards, but the invaluable baggage of knowledge, patents, and engineering solutions. The experience accumulated in creating Stilet, Sanguine, and Compression was not wasted. There is evidence that in the 2010s, Russia returned to the development of mobile laser complexes, and the groundwork of that very astrophysics lies at the foundation of new projects. The story of Soviet laser tanks is not a tale of defeat. It's a story of how a dream ahead of its time suffers a tactical fiasco, but leaves behind seeds that may sprout in the future. It's a story about the price of a technological leap, and how sometimes the very attempt to achieve the impossible becomes the main result.